Hello, welcome back to my channel and to my Michael Powell retrospective. And this week we've reached Gone to Earth. This is for me the last of the great Powell Pressburger films, but it's also the most underrated, the most underseen. I think a lot of this has to do with its rather troubled production history. David Selznick was a partner on the film, and that's why Jennifer Jones was cast as the leading actress. She was his muse at that time, and he was trying to promote her as an actress. When David Selznick saw the finished film, he hated it, and he actually ended up suing Powell and Pressburger. He took them to court so he could change the film. Powell won the case, so he couldn't change the British version, but unfortunately for Powell, Selznick had rights in America and he could change the American version, and boy did he change it. He brought in Ruben Mamoulian, he cut loads of scenes, he recorded new scenes with narration, and he made this awful botched job called The Wild Heart. And unfortunately, that's how the film is best known and best seen around the world these days, not just in America. And it's a travesty. You've got to see the original version, which is about an hour and 50 minutes, and it is available on Blu-ray, Gone to Earth. And I think that because that film hasn't been seen much, that this film has got a poor reputation, because if you see the original cut, this is a little beauty of a film. I absolutely adore it. What Gone to Earth is, first of all, it's one of the great English landscape films. Very few films have really made much of the English landscape, but this film is filmed in Shropshire and on the Welsh borders, and it makes England this magical, mystical, pagan place. Yes, because this is Powell's last great pagan film, his last great riposte to Christian civility. It's based on a book by Mary Webb, and it's a classic earthy story. A gypsy girl living alone with her father out in the back of nowhere. She's caught between the local parson who wants to save her soul and the wicked, evil squire. He's even got a moustache that he can twiddle with, who wants her for various nefarious purposes. I think you can guess what. So it's a classic old story. And out of this kind of earthy tale, Powell spins something I think quite magical. It's kind of like Thomas Hardy in a way, going back to a previous era of English rustic life, to find a kind of utopia really. Though a sobering thought is, this film was made in 1950, and the era it goes back to is, I think is it 1903? So in fact, there's less time between this film and the era it's representing than there is between us and this film, which is a very sobering thought. And what's even more sobering is that there's more connection culturally between Powell's film and the era it's showing than there is between us and Michael Powell's film. Anyway, but this is a wonderfully pagan film. At the centre of it is Jennifer Jones. And this, Jennifer Jones's performance got ruined really by Selznick's edit, and it was kind of forgotten. And that's one of the great injustices of cinema history, I think, because she is wonderful in this film as this kind of willful, capricious, wild country girl with gypsy gorgeous looks. And she has a little fox that she keeps as her cub, her little foxy. Now, Jennifer Jones struggles a bit with the Shropshire accent, but she manfully tries to put it across. And I think her body language and her spirit are absolutely right. You don't care about the accent. It somehow becomes her in the end of the day. And she's supported wonderfully. Cyril Cusack is promoted from his bit part in the previous film, The Small Back Room, and here he plays the parson, a great performance. We have David Farrar takes the role of the squire, and yet again he's a man who, he's very egotistical and driven, and he doesn't want to really, confess to himself that he genuinely is in love with this girl. So Farrar once again taking up that part. But my favourite actor in this film actually is Esmond Knight, a favourite actor of Michael Powell, who was blinded in one eye during the war. And he appears in various bit roles. Here he plays the father. It's a wonderfully broad, shall we say, large performance. But I think it's wonderful. I think he captures the real spirit of the film. So she's a gypsy girl living out in the woods with her father. The start of the film is one of the great set pieces of Michael Powell. She has a little fox cub she keeps as a pet, and this fox cub is threatened by the local huntsman who were led by the squire. And the hunt is coming and you can hear the hounds. So she grabs her little foxy and she runs through the trees. Brilliantly, we never see the hounds or the huntsman. We only hear them and see their shadows across the trees. And this is Powell's pagan universe of nature. We see all the animals running together as a collective from these humans. This one girl represents human beings in union with nature, right? But the men, the forces of civility and society, are threatening. They're never seen. They're a disturbance in the air. And this sets the tone for the whole film and for, Powell's rejection of Christian civility. And what will happen is the local parson will fall in love with her both for her looks and because of her pure singing voice. He takes her into her home, very Victorian, very stuffy society. The film is not, though, about her being civilised by him. No. It's that he learns to see her way. So the squire keeps trying to get into bed with her. And eventually he makes it in a very wonderfully earthy scene, very simple, primitive symbolism here. She comes up to him with some flowers, the flowers drop, and her bare feet are pulled up as he kisses her, and then he treads all over the flowers. It's deflowering, you see, and the flowers are red. Do you get it? So it's very simple, earthy, punchy imagery, this. It's not subtle. But what happens is that we see that there's an overt cruelty in the squire, but underneath actually he's genuinely in love with her, and we find out that when he deflowers her, he actually bursts into tears. The parson comes to reclaim her. He seems to be on the surface, in terms of society, very nice, but when he comes to reclaim her, he treats her badly. And he says this awful thing. He says, well, I'm not particular, I'll still take you anyway. Revealing the cruelty underneath that society. So it's a flip-flop, right? So the squire is horrible on the top, but soft underneath. And society is the opposite. It's nice on the top, but it's cruel underneath. But eventually, the parson realises that he's genuinely in love with her. And he comes round to her way of thinking. He comes round to see this world as a trap. He comes round to talking to the local people who go to his church, his parish, as pot-bellied gods. He starts to see the world in her terms. He rejects Victorian society. He embraces nature, but unfortunately a little too late, because she will always be called to nature, and in the end, once again the hunt comes, and once again her little fox is threatened, and she goes out to save it, just her instinct, which will lead to her death. So that's kind of how the film is working. Right from the very beginning, Powell sets this dichotomy in motion. We see a sign, England this way, Wales that way. This is a film on the borderlands. It's about a woman who's caught between two different kinds of men, two different approaches to civilization. The whole film is about that. I think this film, again, there are many pagan elements in it. Watch out for the eye in the tree, the green man watching as she runs away from the hunt, both an alluring sexual image but also a predatory image. And on that topic of paganism versus Christian civility, look where Powell places the pastor when he prays to God about looking after Hazel, in a cathedral of trees, looking up into the open night sky, just like a pagan worshipper, not in a church, not in a chapel, but among nature. I'd like to mention Brian Easdale's music. Brian Easdale is the great unsung hero of the Powell Pressburger films, and I think his music in this sequence is particularly brilliant. I've also got to mention Christopher Chellis's wonderful cinematography. It's such a beautiful film, this. And Freddie Francis again as the camera operator. I absolutely love this. I also should mention that she is a witch, and her mother has a little book of spells. So it's very pagan. It's the last pagan film that Powell made. I absolutely love this film. I don't care who knows it. Many people dismiss it as a little, also-ran movie, a kind of schematic movie. But I adore it. I think it's a really beautiful film. Many people, though, feel it's the next film that is one of the great Powell Pressburger films and sees the end of their run of great movies. And this is The Tales of Hoffmann, based on the unfinished opera by Offenbach. This is a much loved film. Martin Scorsese has often said that he was very much influenced by this film. George Romero, fact fans, picked it as his favourite film of all time. And this is the true sequel to The Red Shoes. Powell and Pressburger have got the success of The Red Shoes now, and everyone wants to see a sequel to it. So they make this far more composed film. Remember, I was telling you this idea of the composed movie, of bringing together all the elements of theatre, film, dance, opera, music into one composition. And that's what The Tales of Hoffmann is, and that's why many people admire it. I have to make a confession to you. I don't really like opera or ballet. So for me, this film is a bit of a chore to sit through. But I sat through it for you guys following this retrospective just to make sure I wasn't missing out. It's a very beautiful film. It's very stunning. Sometimes I find Hein Heckroth's production design a bit gaudy, a bit over the top actually. And I'm not convinced that the dance sequences in this film are as adventurous or as brilliant as those in The Red Shoes, partly because The Red Shoes integrates them into a narrative story so well, whereas here it's all opera. It's a sort of a opera turned into a dance all the way through. We see Moira Shearer returns, even though she didn't want to do The Red Shoes, but she returns for this film, as does Robert Helpmann, as does Leonid Messine. It's a sort of reunion. And it replays lots of motifs from The Red Shoes. Once again, Moira Shearer does her doll act. There's another concept of a woman caught between love and art in the final Antonia story, where there's a woman who wants to sing, but her love for Hoffmann will prevent her from singing. And there's also the shot where we cross from the fantasy world into the world of the theatre, as we saw at the end of The Red Shoes. So I've got to be honest, it's not my favourite film. I do find it a bit hard work to sit through. I know many people admire it, and it is, gorgeous colour cinematography. But for me, Powell and Pressburger really ends with Gone to Earth. Let's celebrate that run of films. From 49th Parallel, right at the start of the war, through to Gone to Earth, that is an unbroken run of magnificent films. I don't think that is beaten, even equalled anywhere in world cinema. And you could even take it back to the two Conrad Veidt spy films for me. What an incredible run of movies. But Powell and Pressburger ran out of steam. There are 4 other movies that I just couldn't be bothered to do a video on because they're just not worth it, none of them. Eagle-eyed people will know that I've missed out a film, The Elusive Pimpernel, starring David Niven as Baroness Auxey's classic rescuer of French aristocrats from the French Revolution. I didn't do a video on this film because I have no interest in it whatsoever. David Niven had no interest and didn't want to do it. It kind of shows. There were all sorts of production problems, and I don't have much affection for this movie. Though, to be fair to fans of that film, I wasn't able to locate a DVD or Blu-ray of it, so I couldn't re-watch it. Maybe it is good and I missed it. Then there is O Rosalinda, which is the third in Powell Pressburger's trilogy of composed opera films. This is a version of Die Fledermaus, and it brings in another element which I don't really like, which is farce. So we've got opera and farce. I'm afraid I find this film very, very hard work to sit through. It's quite fun seeing some British character actors like Arthur Mullard. Arthur Mullard's in it, and Roy Kinnear's in it at a young stage of his career, so that's quite amusing. But as a film, I just can't find anything to like about it. I'm sorry. Battle of the River Plate is a bit better. It works. It's a war film. Strangely, right at the end of their career, Powell and Pressburger returned to the war for their last 2 movies. This is a very conventional, very stuffy 50s war movie. It has some Powell Pressburger elements, like it has a relationship between a German captain of the Graf Spee. It's set right at the beginning of the war, when the British warships have a battle with a German pocket battleship that is picking off merchant vessels, bringing food to the UK. And what it has is that a British captain is captured by this German captain, and they have a friendly relationship. So again, it goes back to Pressburger and the friendly foreigner, the friendly German. That's quite nicely done. Powell concentrates on the actual mechanics of this battle between these three British cruisers and this German pocket battleship. And then at the end, it devolves into a sort of political comedy of manners as both ships find themselves in Montevideo Harbour, in neutral territory, and then the sort of the diplomats take over, which is rather anticlimactic. It's truthful but a bit anticlimactic. It's interesting that they go back to the war, but the film doesn't have the same fire as those wonderful wartime propaganda films. It feels a bit flat, both directorially and thematically. It's all very present and correct, it's intelligent, it's well written, it has a documentary feel for the battle, but something's lacking, something's gone. Their hearts don't seem to be in it anymore, and the end product is rather indifferent. And as for their last film, Ill Met by Moonlight, well, the less said about that, the better. By common consent, it's often thought of as Powell Pressburger's worst film, and I find it so uninteresting, I can't be bothered to disagree. I just, I mean, suffice to say that I don't think Dirk Bogarde is a Powell Pressburger actor. So it ends with a whimper, not a bang. They just decided to go their separate ways. Strange. They had such vigour and such vitality throughout the 1940s, and then they just seemed to fall apart. What happened? Powell went on making movies, and they weren't terribly good. It was like the stuffing had been knocked out of him. But 2 years after Ill Met by Moonlight, he had one last masterpiece left in him. And ironically, it was a film that would destroy him and his career. And that's the film we'll look at next time.